On the 5th of August, 1876, a bureaucrat named Okuma Shigenobu signed a single document that ended 700 years of a promise. It was called the Chitsuroku Shobun, the disposition of stipends. Somewhere in the provinces, a warrior who had never worked a plow, never sold a fish, never earned a coin with his own hands, opened a letter and learned that the rice his family had been paid for 2 centuries was gone. In its place, a bond. A piece of paper from a government still paying off the war it had fought to exist. He still had his sword. For a few more months, he could even legally wear it. But the thing that made him a samurai wasn't the blade. It was money, and the money had just stopped. That same week, in a warehouse district of Osaka, a merchant family that a century earlier would not have been allowed to sit in the same room as that warrior's ancestors was doing something very different. They were counting. For 7 centuries, the samurai stood at the top of Japanese society. Farmers ranked below them, craftsmen below the farmers, merchants, men who touched money for a living, ranked dead last. And yet when the accounts finally closed, it was not the sword that had multiplied, it was the ledger. So, could becoming a samurai actually make a man rich? Or was status, for 700 years, quietly mistaken for wealth? Imagine a boy born in 1650 into a warrior household. He didn't choose to become a samurai any more than he chose his own face. Status was hereditary, a fixed household rank called IE, decided before he was born. That rank came with a number, denominated in koku, a unit that on the surface sounds quaint, roughly enough rice to feed 1 adult for a year. But the koku was the entire operating system of the economy. Every domain's power, every daimyo's rank at court, every samurai household's income and obligations were measured in it. A man was a 200 koku man, and that number told everyone exactly what he was owed, how many retainers he must maintain, what kind of house he could live in. Here is the first thing to unlearn. That number was never actually cash. It was a legal claim on a harvest that hadn't been grown yet, priced in a commodity that moved every single day it sat in a warehouse. Twice a year, surveyors walked rice fields, estimating yields. Farmers handed over roughly 40 to 60% of their harvest as tax. That rice moved by boat to 2 great commercial hubs, Osaka, the country's clearinghouse for rice, and Edo, the shogun's capital. In Osaka, warehouse masters called kuramoto stored a daimyo's rice. Brokers called fudasashi advanced cash against rice not yet delivered. Both merchant classes sat, by law, at the very bottom of society. And yet, within a single generation, the warrior class could not survive without them. Notice what that arrangement really was. The samurai held the title and the sword. The merchant held the exchange rate between the title and anything a family could actually spend. Whoever controls the conversion between a promise and real cash usually ends up with more power than whoever issued the promise. And almost nobody in Edo, on either side of that transaction, seemed to fully grasp it at the time. A samurai stationed in a castle town needed cash, not rice promises, for rent, formal clothing, gifts, his son's education. So he sold his stipend to a broker. The fudasashi, organized by the 1700s into a guild of roughly 100 licensed houses near Edo's rice warehouses, converted rice certificates into coin, minus a fee, at whatever price rice traded for that week. A price the shogunate itself distorted with an official posted rate that often diverged from the real market. A samurai's actual spending power could shrink because of a decision made in an office he never saw. When expenses outran stipends, which, for most samurai, they eventually did, the same broker who converted his rice was positioned to lend him more against next year's income, at interest. By the mid-1700s, more than 70% of upper-rank samurai households in Edo carried ongoing debt to Osaka merchant houses. By 1800, nearly the entire class did. Families named Mitsui, Konoike, and Sumitomo, names still meaningful in Japanese finance 3 centuries later, built early fortunes lending to the very class legally ranked above them. Surviving household records describe samurai wives rotating ceremonial armor, 200-year-old family heirlooms, in and out of pawn shops before each stipend arrived. The sword commanded respect. The receipt commanded the sword. The numbers make the gap plain. At the top, Hatamoto, direct bannerman of the shogun, could officially earn anywhere from 100 to 10,000 koku. 1,000 koku household lived in a different financial universe, equivalent by some estimates to several $100,000 modern dollars a year. but roughly a third of the shogun's own retainers spent most of the Edo period on stipends of 10 to 30 koku, and the majority earned under 200. A 50 koku retainer, something like 18,000 modern dollars, was expected to support a household of 4 or 5 while maintaining the appearance his rank demanded. Most samurai were not wealthy. They were an increasingly poor hereditary class, locked into fixed incomes for 2.5 centuries, while the cost of everything around them kept rising. The crisis didn't arrive with an army. It arrived with an interest rate. As Japan's cash economy matured, the value of a fixed koku stipend quietly eroded year after year. Domains felt the identical squeeze from above. The shogunate's alternate attendance system, Sankin Kotai, forced every daimyo to maintain a residence in Edo and travel there on a fixed schedule at his own expense, one of the largest recurring costs many domains carried, financed by borrowing from the same Osaka houses their own samurai borrowed from. When interest came due, austerity moved down the chain exactly as it always does, lord to treasury to retainer's stipend. Some domains released samurai into a pool of masterless warriors, ronin, status without income. Others quietly allowed low-ranking samurai to take work their own code considered beneath them, teaching calligraphy or swordsmanship to merchant sons who could actually pay. The blade that supposedly made a man ruling class was, in practice, functioning as a household's emergency line of credit. A family could still command the outward respect of its rank on the street, while at home, the wife of the house was quietly deciding which heirloom would go to the pawnbroker that month and which one could wait until the next stipend cleared. By the mid-1800s, the shogunate itself was drowning in the same arithmetic, directly taxing only a fraction of the nation's total koku while trying to fund an entire government. When it collapsed and the Meiji government took power in 1868, it inherited close to 2 million former samurai still legally owed hereditary stipends the new state could not afford and no longer needed. So it dismantled the class the same careful way it was built. In 1869, warriors were folded into a new category, shizoku, stripped of their old domain ranks. In 1871, the old domain structure was abolished, and every stipend became the central government's problem. In 1873, a national conscript army of ordinary citizens ended the samurai's 7th-century monopoly on arms, and shizoku were offered the option to convert stipends into government bonds. Few did, so on August 5, 1876, the government made it compulsory. Weeks earlier, the Haito Edict had already stripped former samurai of the right to wear swords in public at all. The top knot was already gone since 1871. In about 7 years, the monopoly on arms, the guaranteed income, the visible sword, and the hairstyle all removed. What remained was a bond certificate and a new administrative label. The bonds paid a modest yield that could not replace a lifetime's guaranteed rice. Some former samurai used the capital to build genuine businesses. Many more, trained in nothing but swordsmanship and forbidden for centuries from engaging directly in trade, did not. The resentment reached Satsuma, whose samurai had helped topple the shogunate and were now watching the government they'd installed dismantle their own privileges. In February 1877, students at an academy founded by former restoration hero Saigo Takamori seized a government arsenal in Kagoshima. What followed? The Satsuma Rebellion. Roughly 20,000 former samurai against an imperial conscript army of over 60,000 became the last stand of the warrior class. The government won decisively at Shiroyama that September. Saigo died in the fighting and was pardoned as a tragic hero within a decade. But underneath the mythology sits a plain fact. The rebellion cost the Meiji government so much it leaned on paper currency to cover it, and it proved the old warrior class no longer had the financial or military weight to reverse what had already happened to their income. So who won? Not the samurai, whose stipends became bonds worth a fraction of the old security, and whose monopoly on status had been quietly erased by a conscript army of farmers. Not the shogunate, which had spent its last decades effectively insolvent. The winners were the men the system had ranked last by law. The Osaka and Edo merchant houses, the Fudasashi who advanced cash against rice, the Kuromoto who stored it, entered the Meiji era already fluent in credit and risk, in a country about to build its modern economy on exactly those skills. Mitsui and Sumitomo, Merchant families that spent the Edo period formally beneath the samurai they financed became founding houses of Japan's industrial age. Status in Tokugawa Japan was a legal fiction with real teeth, backed by the right to carry a sword and centuries of custom. But it was never the same thing as capital. Capital compounds and moves to wherever it's needed. Status is worth exactly what the next government decides to honor, which, on August 5, 1876, turned out to be considerably less than 2.5 centuries of promises had implied. For 700 years, Japan organized its social order around one seductive idea: that rank could substitute for cash flow, that a title would keep paying out regardless of prices or the treasury's health. The merchants understood what the samurai code forbade them from admitting: that money which lends, moves, and adapts will always outlast money that simply waits to be collected. The men with the lowest legal status spent 250 years quietly becoming indispensable, one loan at a time, while the men with the highest status spent the same 250 years pawning the family armor to make rent. A sword commands respect for exactly as long as a government agrees to enforce it. A ledger, compounding quietly in the background, tends to outlive every government that ever tried to outrank it.